Your mind is creating your experience right now. Every feeling of peace you have ever known, and every moment of difficulty, began there, in the mind, before anything else. The 13 stories in this video will show you exactly how that works, and what becomes possible when you see it clearly. They come from across the Buddhist world, from the forests of ancient India, from a monastery high in Tibet, from the lives of monks and lay people, and one small bird who could not yet fly. Across 2,000 years and 4 distinct traditions, they carry the same truth. Heaven is a state the mind creates. So is hell. And the mind that created one is fully capable of finding the other. This will take 3 hours. Before we begin, find a comfortable place to sit or lie down. Let your shoulders drop, and let us know in the comments where in the world you are listening from. Wherever you are welcome here, right now. The first story opens in Japan, at the door of a Zen master. A warrior has traveled a long way, carrying a question that has lived in him for years. Where is heaven? Where is hell? And how does a person find one and escape the other? What the master gives him is not an answer in words. It is something that happens in the room, in a single unplanned moment, that makes the question answer itself. There was a warrior in Japan who had never been afraid of anything. He had walked into battles that broke other men. He had stood at the edge of death and felt his hands stay steady. Fear, for him, was something that happened to other people. But there was one question that had followed him for years, quiet and persistent, the way a shadow follows even on a cloudy day. Where is heaven? Where is hell? And how does a person find one and escape the other? He had heard of a Zen master named Hakuin. People said Hakuin was the real thing, not a man who talked about wisdom, but a man who carried it in the body, the way a sword carries its edge. So the warrior made the journey. He arrived at the monastery, stood before the master, and asked his question the way warriors ask everything, directly, with no decoration. Hakuin looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Who are you?" "I am a samurai," the warrior answered. He said it the way a man announces something that should require no further discussion. A samurai, a leader of fighting men, someone the emperor himself had looked upon with respect. His whole life had been the building of that identity, the pre-dawn training, the strict discipline, the decades of proving himself in conditions that destroyed lesser men. He had earned the right to be recognized. That recognition was not vanity to him. It was simply the accurate record of everything he had survived. Hakuin looked him over slowly, from his feet to his face, as if conducting a quiet inventory. Then he said, "A samurai? You look like a beggar to me." Something moved in the warrior's chest. It moved fast, the way fire moves when it finds dry wood. This small man in robes had just looked at everything the warrior had built across a lifetime, every scar, every sacrifice, every hard-won rank, and dismissed it with 4 words. The warrior's hand moved to his sword before he had made any conscious decision to move it. His fingers closed around the hilt. The blade began to clear the scabbard, catching the light for just a moment. And Hakuin said, very quietly, "This is the gate of hell." The warrior stopped. Something happened in that pause that had nothing to do with thinking. The warrior did not reason his way into understanding. He felt it, right there, in his body, in the hand, still resting on the sword. The rage, the heat behind his eyes, the absolute certainty that he had been wronged, he could feel all of it. And he could also feel, for the first time, that it was entirely his own. Hakuin had not put it there. The insult had not manufactured it. It had risen from somewhere already inside him, waiting, the way a wave is already moving through the ocean before anything disturbs the surface. He took his hand from the sword. The heat moved through him and began to leave. His breath returned. His shoulders released. Hakuin smiled and said, "Here, open the gates of heaven." The same room, the same 2 men, the same afternoon light coming through the same window. Everything identical, except one thing, the state of one man's mind. And that single difference was the whole difference between heaven and hell. Hakuin let the silence hold before speaking again. When he did, he spoke slowly, letting each word settle before the next one arrived. "Heaven and hell are not waiting for you at the end of a life," he said. "They are not rooms at the end of a long corridor that you enter only once. They are states the mind moves into and out of, sometimes within the same hour, sometimes within the same minute. When you move through the world driven by reaction, when something threatens the image you carry of yourself, and the response arrives before awareness can, the gate of hell is already open beneath your feet. When you are awake to what is rising inside you, when you can feel the fire before it drives the action, that wakefulness is itself the gate of heaven. The gates do not open once. They open in every moment, including this one. The warrior stood quietly for a long time after that. He had traveled to this monastery looking for a location, somewhere past this life, past this body, where answers waited, like objects arranged on a shelf. What he found was something he had been carrying the entire journey without knowing it. The heaven and the hell had always been moving with him, opening whichever gate his mind was pointed toward in any given moment. Think of an ordinary day, not a crisis, just a regular, unremarkable afternoon. A message arrives from someone that reads as dismissive. A plan you made carefully gets changed without warning. Someone takes credit for work that was yours. By any measure, these are small events. And yet within seconds, Something in the body responds as if something real is under threat. The jaw tightens. The thinking narrows to a single point. The next hour is colored by what happened in 30 seconds. And sometimes the whole evening carries the residue forward into the following morning. Where does that come from? The message did not manufacture the reaction and place it inside you. Something was already present, some accumulated tiredness, some unspoken expectation about how the day should go, some quiet story about what you deserve from other people, and the event gave it a direction. The match did not create the fire. The fire was already there, waiting for exactly the right match. This is what the warrior touched in that monastery, hand on the sword, in the half-second before Hakuin spoke. The suffering was not coming from the insult. The suffering was generated by his own mind, fed by everything he had decided about who he was and what the world owed him in return. And the moment awareness arrived, the moment he could see what was happening rather than simply be swept along by it, the fire found nothing left to consume. There is no shame in recognizing this. The warrior was not diminished by what he found that afternoon. He was freed by it. Because once you can see that the suffering is being generated from inside, you can also locate the resolution in the same place. You no longer need the other person to apologize before you can settle. You no longer need the situation to rearrange itself before you can breathe. The source of the difficulty and the place where it can be met turn out to be the same territory. Your own mind. This is why awareness functions as a gate. Every moment of genuine wakefulness, every time you can feel what is rising before it takes over, is a moment of choice that would not otherwise exist. The gate does not require exceptional discipline to open. It does not open as a reward for years of practice. It opens simply because you are paying attention. That is the whole of the practice at its most fundamental. Seeing clearly what is already happening inside you, just a breath before it becomes action. There is something worth noticing about how quickly the shift happened for the warrior. He did not spend years arriving at that understanding. He did not need a long explanation or a careful philosophical argument. The moment awareness arrived, real awareness, felt in the body and not merely thought in the head, the gate swung the other way in an instant. This is consistent with what the Buddhist traditions have observed across centuries. The shift from one gate to the other does not require time. It requires presence. And presence is available in any moment, including the most ordinary ones, including moments that feel nothing like an insight is coming. The warrior who left that monastery looked identical to the one who arrived. Same face, same sword, same rank, same responsibilities waiting for him at home. But something had quietly reorganized in him, not dramatically, not with the feeling of a revelation, but solidly, the way a key turns and you hear the mechanism settle into place. He had learned where to look. He had learned that the question worth returning to was not the grand one he had carried across the journey, but something smaller and far more immediate. something he could ask on any ordinary afternoon, in the middle of a difficult conversation, in the moment before reaching for the familiar response that closes everything down. Which gate am I standing at right now? That question has a way of returning on its own. You may find it arriving later today, in the middle of something unremarkable, without any effort on your part. Let it come. Let it open whatever space it opens. A question that arrives quietly and asks nothing dramatic of you is already doing something. It is already the gate moving. The next story stays close to what this one found. The mind meeting something unexpected, and what happens in the stillness afterward. The warrior walked away from that monastery, carrying something new inside an otherwise unchanged life. He had found his gate by learning to look inward, to notice what was rising in him before it drove the action. The next story stays in the same territory but arrives at a different question. The warrior's gate had opened in a moment of heated reactivity, everything fast and immediate. This story opens on a much quieter kind of suffering, the kind that does not announce itself with a sword, but gathers slowly over years in the space between an old event and the present moment. High in the hills above a valley in ancient India, the Buddha sat in meditation on a rocky slope. The afternoon was still. Below him, the land opened in long, unhurried shapes, trees, paths, the faint sounds of a village carrying through the warm air. His eyes were closed. His breathing was slow and even, the way breathing becomes when the mind has genuinely put down everything it was holding. He did not hear what was coming from above. His cousin Devadatta stood at the ridge, watching. Devadatta had been watching the Buddha for a long time, not with admiration, but with a feeling that had curdled slowly over years into something harder and more consuming than anything he could name. He had grown up alongside this man. He had watched him become the kind of person that thousands made long journeys to sit near, that teachers and kings received with extraordinary respect. And something in Devadatta had closed around that fact like a fist, year by year, tightening with each new confirmation that the world had arranged its recognition elsewhere. He had practiced. He had worked. He had wanted, for as long as he could remember, to be seen the way his cousin was seen. By the time he stood at that ridge, the wanting had become something with an edge. He found a large rock at the ridge's edge. He pushed it. The rock fell fast, gathering speed down the slope, crashing through scrub and stone with a sound that split the afternoon's quiet. It landed with enormous force just beside the Buddha, close enough to scatter stone fragments across his robes and leave a deep scar in the earth where it struck. The impact would have thrown most people backward. The sound alone would have brought almost anyone to their feet. The Buddha opened his eyes. He looked at the rock. He looked at the broken ground. Then he sat quietly for a moment, closed his eyes, and returned to where he had been. That stillness is worth sitting inside before the story continues. Something violent and deliberately aimed had just entered the Buddha's immediate world, and the mind that received it produced no answering turbulence. No alarm, no anger searching for a target, no agitation spreading outward from the point of impact. The event arrived, was received, and passed through without leaving a residue. What happened next in his awareness was simply a return, the mind finding again what had been present before the rock fell, undisturbed, as if the moment of violence had been absorbed completely by the stillness rather than breaking it. This is what genuine settledness produces over time. An awareness so grounded that disturbances pass through it cleanly, the way wind passes through an open window without displacing the room. Days passed. Then Devadatta found himself face to face with his cousin on a road. The weight of what he had done had been accumulating since the moment the rock left his hands. There is a specific quality to the hours after you have done something irreversible, a heaviness that settles below the chest, a replaying of the moment from different angles, a reaching backward toward a past that remains fixed no matter how many times you return to it. The hours had stretched into days, and the weight had not lightened. Devadatta had rehearsed what he might say many times over. He had imagined the Buddha's anger, imagined perhaps even feeling relief if that anger arrived openly, producing something definite between them. What he had not imagined was what actually happened. He asked his question with the specific shame of someone who already knows what they deserve to hear. Are you not angry? Are you not, at the very least, troubled by what I did? The Buddha looked at him and spoke without performance or ceremony. The man who pushed that rock, he said, is not the man standing before me now. The man who sat on that hillside is not the man standing here. Both of us have continued changing since that moment, breath by breath, experience by experience, in ways neither of us can fully account for. What was done by people who no longer exist in precisely the same form. The moment has passed. What would I hold the anger against? Devadatta stood in silence. The Buddha was being precise. He was describing something he had directly observed about the nature of time and persons, that the continuity we assign to events and to the people connected with them is something the mind actively constructs, layering memory over memory until the original moment disappears beneath everything added since. The rock that fell was real. The danger was real. But the person who pushed it had continued changing in every moment since, and so had the person who received it. Holding either of them permanently fixed to that single moment is like insisting that one particular patch of water in a moving river is the whole river, the same water, still, forever. The river does not stop. It has never stopped. And neither have you, nor the person you may still be carrying in a fixed frame somewhere in your memory. Both of you have been moving through time since that original moment, accumulating new experiences, losses, recoveries, and small shifts in understanding, all of it layering over and subtly altering the person who once stood in the original scene. Almost everyone carries something like this, a name that still arrives with a particular weight after years. Something said in a single moment that became fixed in memory with unusual permanence, the way a photograph holds one frame from a life that kept moving in every direction afterward. The mind returns to that frame. It returns the way a tongue finds a sore place in the mouth, drawn back by the familiar shape of the wound, checking again whether it has finally healed. The person in that frame is not the person alive in the world right now. They are a version of someone caught in a single moment of an ongoing life, tired perhaps, or frightened, or carrying something invisible that you could not see from where you were standing at the time. They changed after that moment, as everyone does, whether towards something better or worse. The person who hurt you and the person existing right now share a name and a history, but they are not an identical configuration of experiences, perceptions, and choices. No two moments of any living person are the same as the last. Growth and change are happening always, in every small experience, in every night of sleep that quietly reorganizes what came before it. And none of that has left you unchanged either. The version of you that was hurt is not the person sitting here now. You have continued. You have added years of living to who you were in that moment. Recoveries both conscious and unconscious, new understanding, layering over old confusion, a gradual and often imperceptible shift in how you make sense of what happened. The wound may still be present. Wounds can be real and persistent without requiring the original event to remain alive in the present tense beside them. What the mind sometimes does is keep the event alive on behalf of the wound, replaying the scene, reinforcing the story wrapped around it, maintaining the original intensity of a moment that has otherwise long since passed, as if that vigilance offers some protection that releasing it would remove. The Buddha offered Devadatta no instruction about how to feel. He named what was actually the case. The moment had passed, both of them had moved through it and continued, and the only location where the event still lived in its original intensity was inside a mind choosing, however unconsciously, to keep it there. Forgiveness, understood this way, asks nothing heroic of you. It becomes available when you look clearly at what time actually does to people and to events. You do not manufacture it through effort or hold it in place through willpower. Something you are holding begins to lose the exact shape you remembered it having. The hand opens simply through seeing, clearly, honestly, without looking away. Is there something you have been carrying whose original moment is already far behind you? You do not need to answer that in words or arrive at any resolution right now. If a name arrived when the question did, a familiar weight, a scene that replays, let it simply be present for a moment, without pressing it toward anything. The river has been moving the entire time. Both of you have been carried along with it, whether or not either of you knew. The distance between then and now is larger than it may feel from inside the memory. The suffering was never locked inside the event itself. The next story finds someone who encountered this truth in the most direct way imaginable, and what the silence that followed revealed about the nature of the mind receiving it. The silence the previous story left behind, the kind that remains when something old has been genuinely set down, is the same silence this story begins inside. Before anything happens, before any force arrives, there is a particular quality of stillness in a forest clearing somewhere in ancient India at night. A monk named Sariputta sat alone in the open air. His head was freshly shaved. His robes had settled around him the way robes settle when a body has been genuinely still for a long time. His breathing was so quiet it was barely visible. The quality of his stillness was the kind that only long practice produces, not the careful holding of a position, but the natural settledness of a mind that had put everything down and found nothing it needed to pick back up. That stillness is the real subject of this story. What follows is a test of what it actually contains. In the world these early accounts describe, the night was thinner than the day, more permeable, inhabited by forces that moved freely in the darkness in ways that daylight did not permit. Two such beings were traveling overhead that evening, passing through the dark air above the clearing where the monks had settled for the night. One of them looked down and noticed Sariputta sitting alone, completely exposed, in the open. Something stirred in response to the sight of him, sudden and unreasoned, the way certain impulses arrive without invitation or explanation and become almost irresistible before they can be examined. An urge to strike him, with no particular hatred or grievance behind it, from the kind of perverse impulse that sometimes crystallizes from nowhere into something overwhelming. His companion issued an immediate warning. Do not touch this monk. He is not an ordinary man. His practice has gone very deep. Leave him alone. The warning was ignored. The blow landed on Sariputta's head with extraordinary force. The texts describe it as the kind of force that could split open a mountain or drive a great elephant to the ground. There was nothing ambiguous about what had arrived. It should have produced a response equal in scale, in the body, in the mind, in the air of the clearing itself. Across the clearing, another monk, named Moggallana, had the capacity to perceive what ordinary eyes could not. He saw what had happened. He crossed the clearing quickly, with the specific urgency of someone who has just witnessed something alarming and does not yet know the extent of the damage. He reached Sariputta and leaned close. "Are you all right?" he asked. "How are you feeling? Are you in pain?" Sariputta looked up at him. He considered the question the way a person does when conducting an honest internal survey, genuinely checking what was present rather than reaching for the nearest available reassurance. Then he said, "I have a slight headache." Sit with that reply for a moment. A blow of sufficient force to level a mountain had landed on this man's head. His friend had rushed across the clearing in alarm, and the report from inside the experience was a slight headache, reported with complete accuracy, not constructed for effect, not offered as a spiritual performance, simply the honest account of what was actually present when he looked. Moggallana stood there, absorbing this. He said, "It is remarkable that you were not simply destroyed by what struck you, because for anyone else, for nearly every person who has ever lived, a blow of that scale would have produced a response equal to its cause. The pain would have been total and immediate. The mind would have flooded with shock, with injury, and with alarm. The stillness of the clearing would have been completely shattered. The silence that existed before the blow would have been unreachable from inside what followed it. Instead, the silence continued, deeper somehow than before. The blow had found nothing home. This phrase is worth sitting inside because it describes something distinct from most of what exists on the subject of managing difficult emotions. Almost everything in that territory operates from a shared assumption: the material inside, the accumulated reactivity waiting to be triggered by insult, threat, dismissal, or the quiet sting of being underestimated, is a permanent feature of interior life. Something to be managed, regulated, expressed more skillfully, released more gracefully. The goal, within this framework, is continuous improvement in the practice of containment, catching the reaction earlier, holding it more steadily, choosing the response more deliberately. The fuel stays. You simply develop better skill at keeping it from igniting, and so the management continues indefinitely. The monitoring, the adjusting, the ongoing effort of maintaining the container against material that keeps generating new pressure. This produces real improvement in daily life, but it also operates within a ceiling that most people who have practiced it long enough can clearly feel. What Sariputta's story describes is something different in kind. The long, patient, unglamorous work of genuine practice had not built a better container around his reactivity. It had gradually, without ceremony or announcement, dissolved the accumulated material that had been waiting to react. The fuel was gone. When the blow arrived, it found no stored resentment to amplify, no identity wound seeking reopening, no reservoir of unprocessed agitation available to catch. The blow passed through and found only the open, clear space of a mind that had been quietly doing its work for a very long time. Think about what it costs you to manage your reactions across an ordinary day. Not the large ones, those are rare. The daily ones, the message that reads as colder than intended, the small ingratitude that would be petty to mention and uncomfortable to absorb, the interruption that arrives at exactly the wrong moment in the wrong tone. Each of these requires invisible internal work: the catching, the reframing, the effort of not going where the reaction first pulls, multiplied across a day, across a week. This is substantial. It carries a specific kind of tiredness, the tiredness of someone maintaining ongoing pressure against something that keeps regenerating. By evening, the fatigue feels vaguely disproportionate to what the day contained. Because the visible events were manageable, the invisible work of managing them was not small. The direction Sariputta's story points toward is not a more efficient approach to that work. It is a direction in which the work itself gradually becomes less. Every moment of genuine stillness, the kind where something is actually put down rather than temporarily held aside, does a small amount of dissolution. Every time awareness arrives, a breath before reactivity does, and the rising charge is seen clearly enough to lose some of its heat. Something dissolves that would otherwise have remained. These moments accumulate invisibly over time, and then something that once reliably produced a strong reaction produces something noticeably smaller without any decision having been made. This is not a promise of arriving somewhere final or complete. Sariputta did not reach that clearing by adding a practice to an otherwise unchanged life. He arrived through years of returning to awareness, to what was actually present, rather than what his mind insisted was present. Each return dissolved a small amount of what had accumulated. The direction is the practice, available from wherever you are standing right now. You do not need different circumstances before beginning. You do not need to feel ready. The direction opens in the very next moment of genuine seeing, whenever and wherever that moment arrives. There may be something in your life that strikes you with particular consistency, a pattern of reaction that reappears no matter how many times you manage it or resolve to handle it differently. A particular kind of person whose behavior reliably arrives before your steadiness does. A specific situation whose texture you have come to recognize before it has fully arrived. The way you recognize the shape of a headache before the full weight has settled. These recurring places are not signs of failure. They are signs that the dissolution work has more to find here than elsewhere. And the dissolution happens here, in the recurring place, in the familiar ground, not in some better arranged version of circumstances. The practice is available exactly here, in the most ordinary form of difficulty your life currently offers. This is where Sariputta's clearing was built, not in retreat from familiar difficulty, but directly inside it, one return to awareness at a time. These three stories have each circled the same essential ground from a different position. The mind that generates heaven and hell in a single moment of reactivity, the mind that holds an old event alive, past the time of anyone still connected to it, and the mind that has gradually, patiently dissolved what was waiting to react. All three are portraits of the mind in motion, but none of them has yet addressed the deeper question that lives underneath. Who is the person inside whom all this motion happens? What is the person at the center of this experience? The next story takes that question to the lowest position in an ancient Indian city and finds something there that quietly changes the entire answer. The question the third story left open: who is the person inside whom all this mind motion happens? Does not resolve through argument. It resolves through encounter. And the encounter this story holds is among the most quietly radical in the entire Buddhist record. A man at the lowest formal position in an ancient city, meeting the teacher considered to have seen most clearly into the nature of things and what moved between them in the space of an ordinary morning on a public road. His name was Sunita. He had been born into a family assigned the work of clearing refuse from the city's streets, a position that, in the social world of ancient India, carried not only poverty, but a formal, inherited designation, communicating something precise to every person he encountered, that his presence in shared space was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be acknowledged. This was not an occasional experience for Sunita. It was the continuous texture of every day. From his earliest years, he had learned a particular set of physical habits in response to this arrangement. When people of higher social standing appeared on a road he was working, he moved immediately to the side. When they walked toward him on a narrow path, he pressed himself flat against the nearest wall and waited, broom held close, eyes directed at the ground, making himself as small as the space around him would allow. When they had passed, he returned to his work without comment. These were not choices he made consciously each time. They were reflexes worn smooth by years of unbroken repetition, the body enacting a social verdict so often that the body no longer needed instruction to perform it. He moved through the streets of the city each day, doing the work that made the city possible and that the city declined to notice. The roads were cleaner for his having moved through them. The people who walked those roads clean did not register his presence. The invisibility was so complete and so consistent that it had, over many years, begun to feel like an accurate account of who he was, rather than an arrangement imposed from outside. This is one of the quieter ways a fixed position reshapes the person inside it. Held inside it long enough, the assigned position begins to feel like identity itself. The story told about you by the accumulated behavior of the world around you gradually takes up residence as the story you tell yourself. One morning, Sunita was working a road at the outer edge of the city when he heard the sounds of a large group approaching. He recognized what it meant without looking up. Someone of significance was moving through, and the road needed to be cleared. He moved to the side immediately, the gesture arriving before the conscious decision to make it. He pressed against the wall, held his broom close, and waited. The group came toward him and moved past him, and then slowed, and then it stopped. He did not look up. He assumed the pause had some ordinary cause, an obstacle ahead, a conversation beginning among the group, any of a dozen unremarkable reasons for a traveling party to pause. He kept his eyes down and waited to be passed. The footsteps that had gone still began to move again. They moved toward him. He looked up. The Buddha stood directly before him, not at the careful social distance people use to appear engaged while keeping another person at arm's length, but close, with the complete, unmodified attention of someone who was genuinely looking at him. No subtle communication that Sunita needed to make space or render himself appropriately invisible. Simply a person standing before him and looking at him as if the sight of him were a thing worth stopping for. In every social encounter Sunita had experienced across his entire life, people with standing had moved past him or around him. The design of the roads, the habits of the city, the accumulated logic of the world he had grown up inside, all of it had been organized to ensure that the movement was always in one direction. They moved forward, and he made space. The arrangement was so consistent that it had long since ceased to feel like an arrangement, and had become instead simply the nature of things. And yet here was the Buddha, standing in the space Sunita had spent his entire life vacating, looking at him with an attention that contained no modification whatsoever. The Buddha asked whether Sunita would like to come, to leave this life, to follow this path, to join this community of practice, to begin something different from what the circumstances of his birth had arranged for him. Sunita stood at the wall with his broom. He could not immediately find words. His entire existence had been organized around the premise that certain things were not available to people born in his position, not through hatred, because the world had not needed hatred to communicate this. It had communicated it through the continuous fine-grained texture of every social interaction he had ever been part of. The directions eyes moved on roads, the quality of silences, the way the city's gratitude for indispensable labor flowed everywhere except toward the people who performed it. The assumption was woven into everything. Some doors opened in different directions for different people, and the directions were determined before anyone had made a single choice. He had lived inside that assumption so thoroughly, and for so long that questioning it required something more than a decision. It required a fundamental revision of what he believed a life could contain. He said yes, quietly. The path he entered was long and genuinely demanding. It was the same path monks from every background walked, offering no additional ease for what he had endured, and placing no additional obstacles in response to where he had begun. The capacity for awareness, for the genuine stillness the previous story found in Sariputta, for seeing clearly what was arising in the mind before it drove the action, all of this was present in Sunita from the beginning. It had always been present, waiting beneath the accumulated weight of everything assigned to him, as available and real as it was in any monk who had grown up inside the most favorable conditions the ancient world offered. In the texts that preserved his own words, Sunita describes what finally happened as something lifting. He speaks of darkness clearing away. He speaks of something falling from him that had been present so long he had ceased to feel its weight. The language he uses is not the language of building or acquiring or arriving at something new. It is the language of uncovering, of returning to something that had always been there and was finally, through years of patient returning to awareness, allowed to show itself clearly. What the world had placed on top of him was real. What was underneath it was more real. The covering had not created what it covered. It had only prevented it from being visible. The verses he left behind are remarkable for their specificity. He does not describe arriving at a truth delivered from outside himself. He describes discovering something that practice revealed was always his, uncovered, the way ground is uncovered when the water that had covered it slowly recedes. What the practice removed was the accumulated belief that the position he had been assigned was an accurate description of him. What remained when that belief fell away was simply himself, clearly visible, unobstructed by everything that had been placed in front of it for an entire lifetime. Think about what has been assigned to you. The formal hierarchical categories that ordered Sunita's world may not be your own, but assignment also happens in registers closer and more intimate than social caste. The parent who communicated early, in language, or in the more powerful vocabulary of their attention, that certain qualities belong to you and others did not. The teacher whose assessment of your capacity arrived at the age when assessments feel permanent and tend to stay that way. The environment that rewarded one particular version of you so consistently that the other versions eventually stopped presenting themselves, because presenting them carried a cost that repetition eventually made too high. The early failure that became a story about what you were suited for and what remained genuinely out of reach, not because the evidence required that conclusion, but because the story settled first and the evidence was sorted afterward to fit. These accumulate quietly, one small reinforcement at a time. They become reflexes. The way Sunita's habit of pressing himself against the wall became a reflex, no longer requiring conscious renewal each morning, simply the body and the mind moving inside the shape of a verdict that had been delivered long ago and accepted for so long, it stopped feeling like a verdict and started feeling like a fact. The medicine this story carries is not reassurance in the ordinary sense. It does not promise recognition or ease. It points at something more durable than either. What the Buddha saw when he stopped on that road was not something Sunita had yet to build or earn or demonstrate. It was something already real, already present, already there beneath everything that had been placed on top of it. The recognition did not create what it found. It simply confirmed that what was there had always been there. Whose verdict have you been carrying the longest? You do not need to answer that in words right now. Just notice whether something arrived with the question, a particular voice, a particular era of your life, a relationship whose assessment of you settled into a permanent residency inside you and has remained there since. Notice it is there. Notice too that the person who delivered it was working with their own limited information at a single moment in their own ongoing life. Their view of you was never the complete account. It was one partial reading from one vantage point of something considerably larger and considerably less finished than any single reading could capture. The person you were described as, and the person actually present in that moment, were never identical. They never are. The description was incomplete at the moment it was delivered, and has grown less accurate with every year that has passed since. Sunita pressed himself against a wall and waited to be passed. The Buddha walked toward him instead. The recognition that followed did not place something new inside Sunita. It cleared what was covering what had always been there until he could see it himself. He found his way not by being told who he was, but by being seen accurately, once, by someone whose seeing was unobstructed, and then by following what that seeing made possible to follow. The next story moves into what following actually costs, and what all of that cost turns out to have been quietly building inside a life all along. Sunita followed. That single word carries the full weight of what the previous story contained. The recognition on the road, the Buddha stopping, the wall a man had pressed himself against for an entire lifetime. Following was the first act of a life reorganized around something other than the verdict the world had delivered at birth. But following is never a single event with a clean conclusion. It is a continuous and sometimes deeply bewildering practice that asks different things at different stages, and almost never asks what the follower expected to be asked. The story that arrives here is from Tibet, several centuries after Sunita's road, and it is about what following can look like when every visible sign suggests the path has made a mistake in choosing you. His name was Milarepa. He came to his teacher Marpa, carrying the full weight of a past he could no longer live inside. The specific nature of what he had done is not the medicine this story holds. What matters is the quality of his arrival. A man who had reached the absolute outer edge of who he had been and needed to change in a way that went far deeper than behavior or habit or intention. He needed something to be genuinely different inside him, and he had made the long journey to Marpa because he had heard that Marpa could reach the place where that kind of change becomes possible. He arrived carrying urgency and hope in equal measure, which is the particular combination of states that makes a person most open to what a teacher offers and most vulnerable to what this story contains. Marpa looked at him for a long moment. He agreed to teach him, and then he told Milarepa to go to a nearby hill and build a tower. Milarepa built it. He moved stone by stone up the slope each day, setting each one with the care of someone building towards something that mattered, watching the structure rise from bare ground into something real and solid and tall. There is a specific satisfaction in this kind of work, the visible accumulation of effort into form, the clear evidence at each day's end that something now exists that did not exist the morning before. He built until the tower was complete, and then brought Marpa to see what had been made. Marpa walked slowly around the structure, looking at it from every angle, with unhurried attention. Then he told Milarepa to take it down and return every stone to the place it had come from. Milarepa dismantled the tower stone by stone. He carried each one back down the hill to its original position in the earth. When the work was finished, the hill looked exactly as it had before he started. Weeks of labor had produced nothing that remained. He returned to Marpa and waited for the teaching that must surely follow. Marpa looked at him and told him to build another tower in a different place on the hill. The listener feels the injustice of this before Milarepa does. Because the listener can see from outside the pattern that Milarepa is inside, can feel what it means to have your labor rendered permanently invisible by the single person whose recognition you traveled specifically to earn. Milarepa could not yet see the pattern. He could only see the next instruction and follow it and carry stones and build and watch the structure rise again under his own hands into something real. He told himself there was a reason. He told himself the teaching was approaching, that this labor was preparation, that something was accumulating inside him through the building, even if he could not yet feel it. These are the exact things a person tells themselves in the early stages of any process that has not yet made its purpose visible. The second tower was also demolished, and then a third was built and taken down. Years moved through Milarepa this way. Tower raised, tower taken down, stones returned to the earth, another beginning on another part of the hill. He received no formal teaching, no confirmation that anything was developing in the direction he had come to find. Only the labor, continuous and apparently without purpose, in the company of a teacher who seemed to regard his sustained effort with something close to indifference. The hope that had accompanied him on the journey here had begun to thin, the way the warmth of conviction thins when it encounters no returning signal. The urgency that had driven him across the distance to Marpa turned inward, circling back through everything that had been endured, and finding less and less reason to continue. He wept, not once, privately, in a managed moment of discouragement. He wept with the full weight of someone who has given everything that a path has asked, without reservation, and cannot locate any evidence that the giving has moved anything at all. He wept for the life he had left behind to come here. He wept for the people his past had hurt, whose suffering he had come to this teacher specifically to address and transform through whatever change practice could produce. He wept for the towers that kept rising from his own hands and being returned to ground before they could mean anything. He wept because he had arrived certain that following the right teacher would produce something recognizable as progress, and what it had produced instead was this: standing on a hillside alone, with nothing to show but the particular exhaustion of someone who has been emptied by labor whose purpose refuses to arrive. The quality of this particular despair is worth naming carefully, because it is distinct from ordinary failure. Ordinary failure carries the seed of a different attempt, a revised approach, a corrected error, a new angle on the same problem. What Milarepa was experiencing had no such seed. There was nothing to revise. The instruction remained the same, build and then take it down. And the absence of any visible purpose made even the idea of revision feel like it was missing the point entirely. This is the specific texture of the difficulty that arrives when the path is working in a direction the ego cannot read as progress. This is where the story reaches most directly into the lives of the people listening. The professional who has given genuine commitment to a project that continues to produce nothing visible. The person who began a practice with real intention and has sustained it for months without any discernible shift in how the interior landscape feels. The one who left something behind on what felt like clear direction and has since found themselves unable to explain that direction to anyone who asks. These are not fringe experiences. They are among the most common and least acknowledged forms of difficulty. The effort that produces no legible result, sustained past the point where the initial momentum ran out. In the absence of any confirmation, that continuing makes sense. The world tends to offer one consistent response to this kind of situation. It says, "This is not working." And it says it quietly and persistently, until the person inside begins to hear the same assessment in their own thinking, delivered in their own voice, in the hours when nothing else is present to offer a different reading. What Milarepa could not know from inside the labor was what the labor was actually doing. Each tower had taken something from him in the building of it, and something else in the demolition. The first tower had taken his fixed idea of what learning was supposed to look like, the accumulative, progressive, visibly rewarding shape he had arrived, assuming growth must take. The demolition of the first tower had taken his expectation of gratitude. The second tower had taken his requirement that Marpa confirm, through some visible signal, that the student was developing correctly. The demolition of the second tower had taken the pride living quietly underneath the apparent humility. Tower by tower, demolition by demolition, across the slow movement of years, Marpa had been dismantling the interior structures that would have blocked the transmission from landing when it finally came. There is a particular architecture most people carry when they begin any serious interior work. A set of requirements the path must satisfy in order to feel legitimate, that progress be visible enough to track, that effort produce recognizable results within a recognizable window, that sacrifice be rewarded in a currency legible to the person making it. These requirements are not unreasonable. They are the natural expectations of a mind formed inside systems where effort and outcome are reliably connected. The deepest work does not follow that pattern at all. It removes before it adds, creates space before filling it, dissolves what was assumed necessary before revealing what was always real underneath. Something fails in that process. The question is whether what is failing needed to survive. For someone standing genuinely inside the difficulty, present in it, giving what it asks, that question is the only one with real purchase, because no external reassurance resolves it. The person inside the field cannot see the field clearly from inside it. They can only continue, trusting the direction rather than the visible outcome, the way Milarepa continued carrying stones long after the stones had stopped making legible sense. When Marpa finally turned toward Milarepa and began to transmit the teachings, what arrived found no obstacles waiting to deflect it. The pride was gone. The requirement for visible confirmation was gone. The fixed expectation of what progress must look like was gone. What the transmission entered was the particular spaciousness that years of unglamorous labor had quietly built, an interior openness that no other method could have produced, because every other method leaves some version of those structures in place. Milarepa received what was transmitted completely. What he became afterward came directly from the quality of that emptiness. He became ready before he became remarkable. That order matters. And readiness, as the towers showed, is built through a process the ego will consistently misread as failure until the very moment it proves otherwise. If something in your life currently looks like it is going nowhere, a practice, a commitment, a direction followed on instinct that has not yet produced anything visible, let that assessment be held lightly. The dissolution of what needs to go rarely announces itself as progress. It arrives quietly, often invisibly, in the form of what is no longer there rather than what has been added. The person who has been working genuinely for months without a clear result may not be failing to make progress. They may be in the middle of the most significant progress available, the gradual clearing of interior space that makes genuine reception possible. This cannot be measured against any prior expectation of what the path was supposed to produce. It can only be noticed later from the position that the clearing itself made possible to reach. Milarepa could not see what the towers were building until he stood in the space the towers had cleared. No earlier vantage point would have made it visible. The visibility came with the arrival, and the arrival required everything that had preceded it. The stone is being moved. You may not feel it moving. That is not evidence that it has stopped. The work that matters most is often the work that produces the least feeling of progress while it is most completely underway. The towers Milarepa built and tore down left no visible trace on the hill. They left everything on him. A man in the ocean comes next, swimming alone, no shore visible, whose steadiness in open water reveals something about equanimity that no calmer situation could have shown, and whose answer to a single impossible question carries the whole of what a settled mind makes possible. Milarepa stood in the space the towers had cleared. The equanimity he eventually found was built through years of unglamorous labor that produced no visible result until it produced everything. The story that arrives now moves equanimity into a different arena entirely, not the monastery, not the hillside, not the long, slow architecture of a practice across years, but open water in a sudden catastrophe, where equanimity must either be present or prove itself absent in the most immediate possible terms. There is no long preparation available. There is only the water and what the person in it does next. A prince named Mahajanaka was sailing across a stretch of open sea when the ship went down. The texts do not linger on the cause. What matters is the speed of it, the way disaster on water arrives faster than the mind can organize a response, the way the deck that was solid beneath the feet becomes water before any adequate plan has formed. The crew and the passengers, people who had made this journey before, people with real knowledge of the sea and real capacity in conditions that would destroy an ordinary traveler, understood immediately what was happening. And in that understanding, one by one, they stopped. Not from cowardice, from arithmetic. The shore was not visible in any direction. No rescue was in sight. No current was moving towards safety. The calculation that the water performed on each of them was clear and arrived quickly. There is no path from here to somewhere safe. So they drowned. Mahajanaka entered the water and began to swim. He could perform the same arithmetic as everyone else. The shore was not visible. No vessel was approaching. The distance between his body and any solid ground was as immeasurable for him as it was for the sailors who had stopped. He held none of the advantages that typically accompany survival. No special knowledge of the currents, no supernatural strength, no certainty that what he was doing would produce what it would need to produce in order to matter. He swam because he was in the water, because his body was capable of swimming. Because these two facts together produced a third, there was something he could do, and doing it was the correct response to the situation he was in, independent of what the doing would eventually become. He swam for 7 days. 7 days is worth holding as a number rather than passing through quickly. 1 day of open water with no visible rescue is enough to break most resolution. 2 days moves from difficult into something the word difficult no longer accurately describes. 7 days in open sea, swimming continuously with no accumulating evidence that the effort is connecting to any outcome. This is not a test of physical endurance alone. It is a test of the relationship between effort and the requirement for result. Most people carry this requirement without knowing they carry it. The effort becomes possible only when some evidence of outcome is visible, or when trust in outcome has been well enough established to substitute for evidence. Remove both, and the effort has nothing to organize itself around. This is why the sailors stopped. The arithmetic of their situation had dissolved the relationship between doing and arriving, and without that relationship, doing became unthinkable. On the 7th day, a goddess named Manimekhala came to the surface of the water. She had been watching. She looked at the man still moving through the open sea in circumstances that had produced the death of everyone else who entered the water with him. And she asked the most reasonable question available: "Why are you still swimming? There is no shore that you can see. There is no rescue that has announced itself. The evidence available to you offers no support for the effort you are making. What is organizing this?" Mahajanaka stopped swimming for a moment. He considered the question. with the same quality of attention he had given to the water. Then he answered it directly. "I swim," he said, "because this is what I am able to do, and because doing it is the right response to being here. Whether it produces rescue is a question whose answer is not in my hands. What is in my hands is the swimming, and the swimming is reason enough for the swimming." He was not describing optimism. He was not describing faith in a particular outcome, or trust that virtue would be rewarded, or confidence that his specific effort would be met with the specific result it was pointed toward. He was describing something considerably more stripped down than any of those: the recognition that effort is the correct response to a situation where effort is possible, and that making the correctness of the effort conditional on the outcome it produces is a way of making effort impossible in any situation where the outcome cannot be guaranteed in advance. Which is most situations. Which is, on any honest accounting, almost every situation that matters. The goddess lifted him from the water and carried him to shore. He recovered, returned to the world, and eventually reclaimed the kingdom that had been his by birth and had been lost in the same extended sequence of events that had put him on the ship. He built something. He worked. He ruled carefully and with full engagement. None of this appeared to disturb his fundamental orientation in either direction. The reclaimed kingdom produced the same quality of equanimity as the open water. He received the good fortune with the same steadiness he had brought to the catastrophe, not because he had trained himself into emotional flatness, not because the good fortune failed to register, but because his interior state had found its ground somewhere beneath the level where fortune and misfortune competed for it. Then, at a point that surprised everyone around him, he left, walked away from the kingdom, the throne, the architecture of everything he had rebuilt through disciplined and sustained effort. The people closest to him could not understand this. They had watched him reclaim something real from loss, and now watched him release it without apparent difficulty. It seemed to contradict the effort he had made. If the kingdom had not mattered enough to keep, why had it mattered enough to reclaim? The question contains an assumption Mahajanaka had never shared, that the intensity of effort directed towards something is proportional to the need to possess it once it arrives. The effort to reclaim the kingdom and the ease of leaving it were both expressions of the same orientation, full engagement with what each moment asked, combined with the genuine absence of a requirement that the outcome be other than what it turned out to be. Think of something you are currently reluctant to attempt because you cannot yet see the outcome clearly enough. A conversation that needs to happen, but carries an uncertain reception. A direction that feels correct but cannot yet be justified with the evidence available. A practice, a project, a relationship gesture that requires moving forward before the result has agreed to make itself visible. There is something specific you are waiting for before beginning. A signal, a guarantee, a confirmation that what you are about to expend will be met with what you are hoping to receive. This waiting is so habitual in most lives that it rarely gets examined directly. It simply operates as a quiet background condition on all forward movement. Make the effort when the outcome is more certain. Not yet. When more is known, when the water shows a shore. The shore Mahayanaka was swimming toward was not visible on the first day, or the third, or the sixth. It became visible because he was still in the water when it appeared. The effort was not validated by the rescue. The rescue was made possible by the effort, which had already been its own validation across 7 days of open sea. What you are waiting to know before beginning may not arrive before beginning. It may only arrive because you began. What are you waiting to know before you will swim? Let that question remain open. It does not press for an immediate answer. It simply asks to be held without being resolved too quickly into a comfortable response that makes it easier to put down. Equanimity in open water is one thing. What follows is closer. A woman in an ordinary domestic afternoon who discovers what presence so complete feels like when something genuinely dangerous arrives to test it. Mahayanaka's equanimity lived in open water, tested by catastrophe at the farthest possible remove from anything ordinary. What arrives now is considerably closer. No shipwreck, no open sea, no 7 days alone in water with no shore in any direction. A woman in a city, in a household, making a practical arrangement for the next 2 weeks of her life, setting down the management of domestic responsibilities so that she could give those weeks entirely to one practice. She was not a monk, not a wandering ascetic, not someone who had arranged her entire existence around contemplative life from an early age. She was a laywoman with a household and obligations, and a life that made the ordinary demands that ordinary lives make. And yet what this story has preserved is among the most arresting images in the Buddhist record. Boiling oil touching a woman in complete meditative absorption and finding absolutely nothing to burn. Her name was Uttara. She arranged her household for a defined period, handing over the daily coordination to a woman she had hired for this purpose, and she entered 2 weeks of uninterrupted practice in loving kindness, the cultivation of genuine goodwill, directed without exception toward every being she could bring to mind. No selection, no hierarchy, no person more or less deserving of that goodwill than any other. Simply the deliberate, sustained practice of wishing well to all of it, every being, in every condition, without remainder. The word uninterrupted carries the weight of everything that follows. She did not plan to practice when the morning permitted, or to give her best hours to the cultivation and the remainder to everything the household required. She had cleared the field before beginning. The responsibilities were held by someone else. The conditions for undivided presence had been deliberately, practically arranged before a single sitting began. This is the quietly radical act at the center of the story, and it arrives well before anything dramatic happens. Most people who intend to give full attention to something give something close to full attention, with the remainder distributed among what came before and what comes next, the conversation not yet resolved from the morning, the task waiting at the far edge of the afternoon. Uttara had removed these one by one. She began with nothing held in reserve. Loving kindness, practiced this way, does something specific to interior space. It does not protect by building walls. It occupies. The sustained cultivation of genuine goodwill, directed without pause and without selection toward all beings, gradually fills the interior surface of the mind with one quality of attention until very little room remains for anything else to take hold. This is not the filling of distraction or busyness, which leaves the underlying surface cluttered and available. It is the filling of genuine presence, clear, warm, and complete, that leaves nothing unoccupied for the usual intrusions to settle into. The woman who had been hired to manage the household during this period saw Uttara's husband, and something moved in her that displaced everything else. A belief assembled itself quickly and without much examination that the arrangement she had entered concealed an injustice she had not initially perceived, that Uttara held something she was more entitled to. The belief gathered weight across days. It sharpened from a vague grievance into something that felt as though it required a response. She heated oil to the temperature that makes it genuinely dangerous. Then she walked toward Uttara with the pan raised. This is the moment the story has been approaching. The other woman raised the pan. The oil moved toward Uttara's head. The oil landed, and nothing happened. Hold that image before anything is added to it. Boiling oil, a woman in complete, unbroken absorption. The oil makes contact. Nothing happens. Not a controlled response. Not a trained demonstration of endurance. Not willpower applied at the point of impact. Something had developed inside Uttara through 2 uninterrupted weeks of genuine practice that the oil encountered the way fire encounters ground that has been completely, thoroughly saturated with water. There was no dry surface. The oil arrived and found nothing available to ignite. What the practice had built was not a defense. It was a fullness, every interior surface already occupied with one quality of attention that left no available space for what arrived to land in. The quality of presence this describes is not the exclusive result of extraordinary discipline. It is the natural outcome of something considerably more accessible, being so completely in one place with one quality of attention that nothing arriving from elsewhere has a surface to catch. Uttara was not partially elsewhere in any portion of herself. No fragment of her attention was monitoring the room, or assessing the afternoon, or anticipating what would need her when the sitting ended. The practice had filled every available interior surface. The jealousy that entered with the oil arrived in a room already entirely occupied by something else. It found no gap, no vacancy, no unattended corner where it might establish itself and begin to spread. Most of the disturbances that arrive in an ordinary day do not come as boiling oil. They arrive as a tone in a message that reads differently than intended. A remark that catches sideways during an already difficult week. The particular quality of someone's silence that carries its own unspoken weight, a piece of news received at the wrong moment that shifts the color of everything that follows it. These are small in scale compared to what arrived in Uttara's afternoon, and yet they penetrate reliably in ways that alter the quality of the hours that follow. They find the gaps where attention has not fully landed, where some portion of awareness is still occupied with what came before or reaching toward what comes next. They enter through those openings and settle into exactly the space that genuine presence would have already filled. The difference between a wall and a full room is the central teaching this story holds. A wall requires constant attention, building, maintaining, repairing wherever pressure finds weakness. The ongoing effort of keeping something out. What Uttara's practice had built was different in kind. She had not constructed a defense. She had filled the available interior space so completely with one quality of attention that the space for disturbance was already occupied when the disturbance arrived. The oil met fullness. There was simply nowhere for it to enter. The other woman stood looking at Uttara, undisturbed and completely intact. What she had intended to harm had received her action and registered nothing. The certainty that had organized everything she had done over the preceding days, the accumulated justification, the conviction that what she was doing was warranted, met the sight of Uttara's complete stillness and dissolved. She fell to her knees and asked forgiveness. Uttara's response is the second half of the medicine. She said, "If I hold any anger toward you in my heart, may this forgiveness not hold." And then, without pause, I hold none. This was not a difficult virtue assembled under pressure in a hard moment. It was a simple, honest account of what was actually present when she looked. The practice had not required her to suppress anger at the moment the oil arrived. The anger had not formed. The material anger requires, in order to take shape, the stored grievance, the accumulated sense of personal injury, the identity that experiences threat and demands response, had been so thoroughly worked through across 2 weeks of genuine practice that when the provocation arrived, real and physically dangerous, it found nothing ready to become anger from. There is a version of this available in a completely ordinary life, at a distance considerably closer than 2 weeks of uninterrupted retreat. It begins with the smaller decision to be entirely in one place rather than partially somewhere else. The person who arrives home in the evening and sits at the table while mentally still at their desk is experiencing the ordinary form of what Uttara had dismantled. The residue of the day occupies the interior space the evening would otherwise fill. What would it mean to identify one specific threshold? A doorway, a minute, sitting in the car, before getting out, the walk from the street to the front door, and use it as a genuine transition between one domain and the next. To set down the day before entering what comes after it, The way you set something heavy down before reaching for something that requires both hands. To arrive at the kitchen, the bedroom, the evening walk with the previous hours genuinely behind you, rather than still being processed in the foreground of everything that follows. The evening that receives you whole, the version of you that is actually here, not still sorting the afternoon, is a different evening. The people sharing it with you meet a different person. The quiet at the end of it lands differently in a space that is genuinely clear. What fills the interior space before anything arrives from outside determines what outside things find when they land. Uttara's practice had filled that space with something that left nothing for the oil to ignite. The direction is available in whatever the next ordinary moment of your life happens to contain. What would it feel like to be so completely here that the usual disturbances found no available surface to catch on? Let that question sit without pressing it toward a comfortable resolution that makes it easy to set aside. The teaching that follows moves into a different register entirely, into time itself, and into what understanding impermanence clearly does to both grief and joy when they are held in the same clear awareness. It begins with two people who loved each other from childhood and brought their deepest wish to the one most likely to understand what to do with it. Uttara's practice had filled interior space so completely, with one quality of attention, that what arrived from outside found nothing available to catch. Her story was about the present moment as fullness, about being so entirely here that disturbance could find no vacancy to enter. This story approaches the present moment from a different direction entirely. It is about what ordinary days become, what familiar voices become, what taken for granted mornings and long shared spaces become, when impermanence is held clearly enough that it makes a person genuinely, unhurriedly present for all of it while it still is. And it begins with two people who had been together for most of their lives, walking toward the Buddha on an ordinary afternoon, carrying a wish that almost anyone who has loved deeply or who has lost deeply will recognize before the story has properly begun. They had been together since they were children. This detail is preserved in the texts because it does real work in the story. It establishes a love that had not simply been chosen once and maintained by the momentum of shared habit, but chosen continuously across the full accumulation of what long lives genuinely contain, the difficulties that permanently reshape people, the losses that alter the texture of a shared existence in ways that cannot be undone or returned to, the long, slow negotiation of two lives that remain genuinely oriented toward each other through all of it. Through all of those years, across all of those decades, neither of them had drifted, not in action and not even in thought. Their names were Nakulapita and Nakulamata, husband and wife, aging now, who came to sit with the Buddha, carrying in common the wish that the love they had built across a lifetime would somehow persist beyond whatever was coming. "We have been together from the beginning," they said. "We have been faithful to each other completely, in action, in word, and in thought. across all the years and through everything those years contained. We wish to remain together beyond this life. We wish to be found by each other in whatever comes after. Tell us how to make certain this does not end. There is a specific quality to a wish that already knows, somewhere beneath its own articulation, that what it is reaching for cannot be guaranteed by any means the person making it has access to. This couple arrived not with a philosophical question, but with the most tender and most private thing two people who have built a long life together can bring to anyone: the fear underneath the love. Not the abstract fear of death in the general sense, but the specific and textured fear of the one who will remain when the other leaves, standing inside a life built entirely around a presence that will no longer be in it, trying to imagine that standing, already feeling its precise weight from this side of it. The Buddha received their wish without deflecting or diminishing it. He told them what they sought was genuinely possible. Two people equal in faith, in virtue, in generosity, and in wisdom could find each other again across whatever their lives held. Build these four qualities together as you continue, he said, and the depth of connection you have made will carry something durable through whatever change comes. The couple received this the way people receive what they had traveled a long way, hoping to hear, with the quality of attention that opens when relief and recognition arrive together. And then he said one more thing, and what followed gently shifted the center of gravity of the entire conversation without diminishing what had just been offered. Whichever of you leaves first, he said, and one of you will leave first. Let the one who remains not grieve. The person who has truly understood impermanence, who has held it as a living reality in the actual texture of each ordinary day, rather than as a concept to occasionally agree with, has received something that changes what loss can actually do to them. Because impermanence, understood clearly, does not prepare you for loss by making what you love matter less. It moves in precisely the opposite direction. It makes what is here matter completely, right now, in this present moment, while it is entirely available to be received and inhabited and genuinely present for. The familiar use of impermanence is as comfort in difficulty. The current configuration is not permanent. The suffering has a shape that time and changed conditions will eventually alter. This is real and offers genuine relief, and anyone moving through a difficult period needs to hold it. But it is only one of the two directions this teaching works in. The second direction, the one the Buddha was pointing this couple toward, is the recognition that the good thing, the beloved, familiar thing, the person, or mourning, or ordinary exchange that has been so reliably present that it has gradually stopped being received as anything specific or singular is also passing. Right now, in real time, while it is entirely, completely, unreservedly here to be received with full attention. the morning that passed through the hands without being tasted, because the mind was already at the desk before the body had left the table. The meal shared while the conversation ran at 3/4 attention, because the remaining quarter was resolving something from earlier in the day, so that the person across the table received something very close to presence but not quite the whole of it. The voice in the next room so familiar, it has become background, registered as confirmation that things are as expected, rather than as the specific and entirely unrepeatable sound that a specific and entirely unrepeatable person makes while moving through a shared space. The person reachable right now by any ordinary means, whose consistent availability the mind has quietly reclassified from gift into given, and in doing so has stopped actively receiving. Impermanence held with genuine clarity converts all of this. It does not install anxiety about what will one day be absent. It installs presence in what is right now, fully, unreservedly here. The ordinary Tuesday morning becomes, through the clear recognition that this specific morning is happening exactly once, something worth being completely inside. Nakulapita and Nakulamata walked away from their meeting carrying both parts of what had been given. The path toward being found by each other across time, and the teaching that converted the time remaining between them into something different in quality from all the time that had come before. The second gift was the larger one because it was immediately available in the walk home through the afternoon light, in the meal that evening, in the whole quiet, ordinary texture of a shared life. That impermanence, now seen clearly between them, had converted from familiar background into something they were actually inside, together. They arrived hoping to secure the love's continuation. They left with the capacity to genuinely inhabit it, perhaps for the first time, with the full weight of knowing what it was and what it would eventually not be. If you are moving through grief right now, if the loss this couple feared has already arrived in your own life, this teaching works differently for you. The suffering you are carrying has a shape, and that shape, like all shapes, will shift with time. This is the same principle the Buddha named to the couple, seen now from the other side. This too is changing. The heaviness of this moment is not the permanent texture of all moments ahead. There is someone in your life right now whose presence you have been receiving at partial attention. The habit that produces this is nearly universal and barely visible, treating what is reliably present as though its reliability were a guarantee of continuation, rather than a reminder of impermanence. The aging parent whose particular way of occupying a room you have stopped consciously noticing because it has always been there to notice. The friendship maintained at the level of intention rather than actual contact. The reply still pending after an interval long enough to have become quietly uncomfortable. The person in the next room whose availability has been so consistent that the mind treats their presence as ambient rather than attending to it as the singular and time-limited thing that impermanence reveals it to be. Impermanence does not ask you to relate to everyone you love through constant anticipatory grief about what will one day be absent. It asks something simpler and more immediate. Be here, now, with this person, with the full quality of attention that this particular, unrepeatable moment has always deserved, and that impermanence makes quietly urgent to give while giving remains entirely possible. This too shall pass. The difficult season certainly, and with it, the specific weight it has placed on each ordinary day that moves through it. Also this, the unremarkable afternoon, with the familiar voice and the taken for granted presence and the person available by any ordinary means right now. Both are moving in the same direction, at the same rate, with no difference in how completely they pass. The mind that holds impermanence clearly is not bracing against future loss. It is turned toward what is here, receiving it with full, open attention, while it remains completely here to receive. Who have you been too busy to be completely present with? Let whoever arrives with that question simply be here for a moment. The face, the voice, the specific unrepeatable presence, held with the full quality of attention that impermanence makes quietly urgent to give. There is still time. That remains true until, one day, it is not. This is what impermanence teaches before anything else. Right now, in this ordinary moment, the time is here. What holds all of this, grief and joy, the passing of what is loved, the ordinary morning turned luminous by impermanence, is awareness itself. The next story asks what that awareness becomes when it has gone deep enough that nothing arriving from outside can disturb the ground it stands on. What that awareness becomes when nothing arriving from outside can disturb the ground it stands on. This is what the next story answers, and it answers without preparation, without the long arc of a life reorganized around practice, in conditions that compress everything to its most essential form. A forest clearing, a night, a group of men with a decided intention, and a monk named Adimutta, who had nowhere more favorable to be than exactly where he was. The bandits had taken him while he traveled. What they were preparing is stated plainly in the text that preserved this account, a ritual requiring a human life, and Adimutta was the life their particular evening had produced. He was bound and held while the men moved through their preparations with the focused efficiency of people whose decision has already been made and whose remaining work is simply execution. No alternative presented itself. No negotiation was available. No exit existed in any visible direction. The interval between now and what was coming was the only thing the situation contained. What the men had not anticipated was the quality of what they found when they looked at the person they held. A person facing imminent death is supposed to produce something recognizable, the fear that arrives when the body understands with full biological clarity what is approaching, the desperate bargaining, the particular quality of a gaze genuinely searching for any possible exit from an entrance that has already closed. None of that was present. Adimutta was not assembling composure through an act of will applied at the point of maximum pressure. He was sitting with the settled quality of a mind that had genuinely put everything down and found, beneath what it released, something the situation could not reach. The men continued their preparations, but something in the quality of Adimuta's presence had changed the atmosphere of the clearing in a way that moved below conscious evaluation. The man they held was supposed to be the most frightened person in the scene. He was demonstrably the calmest. This gap between expectation and reality widened as the preparations continued, and the widening gap produced its own effect, a growing unease in the men that they could register without being able to name its source. The certainty organizing what was happening began to lose its clean edges. The stillness that should not have been present was making itself felt across the clearing, quietly altering what everyone inside it was experiencing, without any of them having words for what had changed. The leader came and stood before Adimuta. He looked at him carefully for a long moment and let the silence extend before speaking. Then he asked the only question the situation had made available to him. "Why are you not afraid?" Adimuta looked back at him without hurry. What followed was not a speech rehearsed against this possibility, not a philosophical argument offered in hope of changing the outcome, not a performance of courage assembled for an audience. It was a description, careful, plain, and without the smallest quality of theatre, of what he had directly found through years of practice. He said, "Everything in this moment is real and fully present. The danger is here. The uncertainty is here. What you intend is near, and I am not claiming otherwise. But the awareness that is receiving all of this, the field in which the danger and the uncertainty and the nearness of what is coming are arising, is undisturbed by any of it. What holds all of this is not touched by what it holds, and I am more that awareness than I am any of its current contents." The leader stood very still. This answer had no prepared response waiting for it. Fear, the leader understood. Defiance and bargaining and pleading all arrived in shapes with predictable trajectories. What Adimuta had offered was something that operated differently, a report from an interior condition, so unlike anything the leader carried, that it arrived as a fact to be absorbed, rather than a position to be countered. The monk was not attempting to produce any particular outcome. He was accurately and simply describing the actual contents of his own awareness when he looked at them honestly, the way a person describes the weather they are standing inside, rather than the weather they wish were happening instead. There is no gap between his description and what is actually present, because there is no agenda organizing the description. Accurate description of something genuinely real has a specific quality. It does not press against anything because it is not directed at anyone's belief. It simply is. And what simply is has a weight. That argument, however skillful, does not produce. The mind gripped by difficulty has a nearly universal habit. It locates the source of pain, the unresolved situation, the fear that returns in the quiet hours, the wound that reopens reliably under certain conditions, and draws it toward the center of the entire field of awareness. The habit operates without instruction, the way a compass needle swings toward magnetic north without being asked. The difficulty fills the available interior space until the space itself appears to be defined by what it contains. The awareness holding the difficulty becomes invisible because the difficulty has claimed all available attention, and awareness cannot observe itself while it is fully absorbed in what it holds. The person who wakes before dawn with one problem filling the entire interior field is experiencing this exactly, a vast and undamaged awareness compressed around a single point of pain, until that point appears to constitute the whole of what exists. The point feels like the entire canvas, but it was never the entire canvas. The awareness was never as small as what it held. This is not reassurance constructed to soften difficulty. It is an accurate description of what awareness actually is. The field in which all contents arise and pass, which is itself neither arising nor passing, neither enlarged by what enters it, nor diminished by what remains. The dark point is real. The canvas is also real, and considerably larger than any point it has ever held. When the point fills everything visible, that is not because the canvas contracted. It is because the field of attention narrowed until it found only the point, and the surrounding space receded below the threshold of notice, the way a room disappears when a single candle occupies the center of it at night. What genuine practice does, without ceremony, without any single event marking its arrival, is gradually widen the field of attention until the point and the surrounding canvas are simultaneously present. The point does not change size. The canvas reasserts its actual scale. When both are visible at once, the experience of holding difficulty changes completely, not because the difficulty has become lighter, but because what is carrying it is no longer hidden from the person inside it. Adimutta had not made the danger of that night smaller than it was. He had not achieved distance from it through any form of detachment that removes a person from what is actually happening. He had found, through patient and unglamorous years of returning to what was actually present rather than the stories constructed around it, that the awareness receiving the danger was larger than what it received. He had found this not through reasoning or study alone, but through repeated, direct contact with the actual texture of his own experience across long years of consistent return. The threat was real and fully present. The awareness holding the threat was undamaged. Both remained simultaneously true. The second did not cancel the first. It returned the first to its actual proportions within a field that the danger had never genuinely managed to fill. The bandits released him. Several of them, before the night closed, asked to be taught. What releases something in the listener is not located in this practical outcome. It arrives at the moment Adimutta put into plain words what he had found, a ground beneath all content that holds without being moved, available not as a distant attainment reserved for those with exceptional practice, but as the actual underlying nature of awareness, already present in every person capable of being aware of anything at all. Practice did not construct this ground. practice cleared the accumulated material on top of it. Layer by layer, one genuine moment of seeing at a time, across years of quiet, returning to what was actually present, rather than to the stories the mind builds around it. The covering thinned until what had always been underneath became visible. In this moment, wherever you are, whatever you carried into this listening, there may be something occupying the center of your awareness with unusual persistence. A situation still unresolved, a fear whose weight and shape have become familiar through the frequency with which it arrives, a difficulty whose presence colors the quality of the hours around it, sometimes arriving before the day has begun, already present in the first moments of waking. The difficulty is real. Nothing here has reduced what it costs to carry it. And in the same moment, in the awareness holding exactly that difficulty, something else is also present. The awareness itself, receiving the difficulty without being reduced to it. You are here, listening. The difficulty is present in the awareness that is listening. The awareness is also present, not as a concept, but as the actual fact of being here, in contact with what this moment contains. It is larger than what it holds. It has been here continuously throughout this entire listening. Underneath everything, the mind has moved through, uninterrupted and undamaged. The dark point is real. The canvas has always been larger. Both are here, in this moment, available to the same awareness receiving these words right now. A monk who walked voluntarily toward the most difficult people he could find comes next, carrying nothing except the quality of undisturbed ground he had found through long practice. And what happened when everything that hostile territory contained met what he brought into it? The undisturbed ground Adimutta found in the forest clearing was tested by people who had not sought him out, people who arrived at an encounter they had not planned, with a person whose qualities they had not anticipated. What arrives now turns this around entirely. A monk named Puna came to the Buddha carrying a specific and deliberate request. He wanted to go and teach in a region called Sunaparanta, known across the territory as the place where strangers were most consistently met with hostility, insult, and violence. He had not been sent there by anyone at all. He had not been assigned there by any circumstance. He had chosen it, the way a person who has found something genuinely solid in themselves chooses the hardest ground available to discover whether what they have found will actually hold when the conditions are uncontrolled. The test is real, and nothing has been arranged in their favor. The Buddha looked at Puna for a long moment. Then he asked the first of a series of questions, each one extending the previous into territory more demanding than the last, each waiting for a full and honest answer before producing the next, each functioning simultaneously as both preparation and examination. The people of Sunaparanta, the Buddha said, are known for verbal abuse. If they insult you, what will you do? I will be grateful, Puna said, that they insulted me and did not strike me. The Buddha waited a moment. And if they strike you, grateful that they struck me and did not throw clods of earth. And if they throw clods, grateful that they used clods and not weapons. And if they use weapons, grateful that they used weapons and did not take my life. The silence before the next question extended noticeably longer than the others had. The Buddha delivered it without softening the weight of what it contained. And if they take your life? Punna received this without hurry. He held the question for a moment, with the same quality of attention he had given each of the earlier ones. Then he said, "I will be deeply grateful. There are those who have had to seek a blade themselves to end their own suffering. These people will have freed me without requiring any effort on my part." The Buddha said, "You are fit to go among the people of Sunaparanta. Go now." The listener who has followed this exchange has already been moved somewhere before Punna delivers his final answer. The first responses demand genuine interior reorientation, gratitude for the insult that stopped before a blow, for the blow that stopped before a thrown stone. Each requires the mind to turn in a direction it instinctively resists, the way a door resists opening, the way it was not built to open. The resistance loosens with each successive answer, steadily losing what it was using to sustain itself until the final answer finds it with very little left to work from. Gratitude for being killed, delivered without theatre, as the plain and fully consistent extension of one orientation carried to its furthest conceivable point, removes the last surface the resistance was resting against. The exchange has arrived somewhere the listener did not anticipate being when it began, and that movement is itself the medicine working briefly in the same interior territory Punna described. What Punna described across all 5 answers was one continuous orientation, applied without revision to whatever each situation produced. Each response emerged from the same interior location, the same quality of attention, extended without adjustment across each escalating degree of difficulty. This quality required full presence at every stage, receiving what had actually arrived, rather than the assembled version of threat the mind typically constructs around a provocation before the provocation has been clearly seen. The usual interior sequence moves like this. Something arrives. It registers as threatening to identity or comfort or safety. A reactive response is assembled from stored material and delivered before the arriving thing has been accurately perceived. Punna's orientation intercepted this at the precise gap between receiving and responding, not by forcing what arose to stop, but by remaining so clearly present with what had actually arrived. Words, sound, someone's agitation, expressing itself outward, that the threat the mind builds around such arrivals found less material to organize itself from than it usually finds. The insult arrived. He received it as what it actually was. In that clear receiving, the reactive sequence found less purchase than it needed to proceed at full charge. This gap between receiving and responding, small, almost invisible from the outside, and through sustained practice wide enough to hold an orientation that insult and violence and the prospect of death could not close, was the practice itself, visible in its most essential form. Think of a person in your own life whose particular way of engaging reliably produces in you a response you recognize beginning before the exchange has fully started. Someone in the middle range of difficulty, someone whose texture you know well enough that the body has already begun assembling its familiar interior response before you have entered the room. The bracing begins before anything specific has arrived to warrant it. The familiar shape of the response settles into readiness before the person has said anything. What they receive when you first make contact is the accumulated weight of every previous version of themselves you have encountered, present in how you arrive, in the position your body takes toward them, in the quality of attention you bring before any word has been exchanged. They respond to that weight because it is genuinely present, and in responding to it, they become its confirmation. The encounter takes the shape of all the previous ones before it has produced anything new, because both people arrived, already organized, around the configuration they know. The body runs the stored pattern automatically the moment the familiar context is recognized, without deliberation. The question with the most practical purchase is, what would have to shift in the quality of arriving for the encounter to have room to produce something genuinely new, something neither person has carried in from before? That answer lives entirely on your side of the exchange, which is where the only available leverage exists. Softness, as Punna practiced it, begins before the difficult encounter has started. It is the quality of arriving without the previous encounters already fully loaded and present. Difficult relationships persist in their particular configuration because of what both people have assembled before the encounter begins, rather than what happens once it has started. Each person arrives organized around what they know the other will produce. Arriving that way ensures the other produces it. The pattern confirms itself through the anticipation of itself, adding the weight of each new encounter to the stored expectation that shapes every subsequent one. What softness disrupts is this anticipatory loading. Arriving genuinely open to what the present moment contains gives the encounter room to form differently from everything that preceded it. The difficult person may not change. What changes is the surface their behavior meets when it arrives, and that surface determines what the behavior finds available to sustain itself against, and what it finds itself encountering instead. Punna traveled to Sunaparanta and practiced through the entire rain's retreat among those people. By the season's end, 500 of them had taken refuge in the teaching. The texts offer no dramatic account of how this came about, no single confrontation navigated with exceptional skill, no turning point identified as the moment that shifted what was happening. The account is plain and factual. He went. He remained through the whole of the season, and by its close, the people most prepared to break him, had found in him something they moved toward of their own accord. He had arrived without hardness and stayed without hardness across the full period, bringing nothing into the room that the hostility already present could organize itself against. Hostility that meets no answering rigidity has nothing durable to push against and nothing to confirm itself through. It loses the form that only resistance had been holding in place. This requires no superior argument, no demonstration of endurance. It requires only the consistent, unhurried absence of the surface the hostility was using to maintain its shape. For the full duration of that season, Puna was that absence. Sustained presence of this quality reaches places that argument cannot. Hold this question without pressure. Is there a situation in your life right now that you have been entering with the pre-assembled response, already organized around what is coming before it has arrived? The pattern is available to see more clearly than it usually is in the space between encounters, when nothing is yet assembled and the quality of the arriving is still an open question. In one specific upcoming encounter, what would it mean to arrive a little more open to what this particular moment actually contains, rather than what the accumulated memory of similar moments insists it will contain? Softness keeps genuine contact available when hardness has already closed the last remaining opening. The 500 of Sunaparanta did not change because Puna argued skillfully or demonstrated superior endurance under sustained pressure. They changed because he remained soft enough, long enough, that the hardness they brought had no answering surface to hold itself against. Without that surface, the shape, the hostility, had needed the resistance to maintain, simply dissolved. What remained was the quiet field. His consistent presence had held open across the whole of the season. What one person's sustained softness makes possible in a direct encounter, the story that follows finds at the scale of an entire community, a group that lost the capacity to nourish each other through the accumulated weight of a prolonged disagreement, and who discovered what direction care had to begin flowing before anyone inside it could find their way back to something worth calling whole. Puna went to the hardest people available and found that sustained softness, maintained without revision across an entire season, dissolved the surface hostility had been using to hold its shape. That story lived in the most intimate dimension available, the space between one person and another, the quality of what each brought into the room before a single word had been exchanged. What arrives now operates across a wider field, an entire community that had been living and practicing together, sharing meals, sharing space, sharing the common purpose that had gathered them into proximity in the first place, until a disagreement of principle had, through the slow accumulation of weeks without resolution and exchanges that left residue rather than clarity, become something considerably harder and more consuming than any principle it had begun inside. The monks of Kosambi had divided over a question of practice. The original dispute had specific content that the texts preserve, but its content matters less for this telling than what happened to the community as the disagreement extended without resolution and began without anyone quite deciding it should, organizing the texture of daily life around itself. Factions formed, each acquiring supporters who gave its position weight and coherence through collective adherence, so that what began as a dispute between individuals became something the community breathed inside of and structured its days around. The monks who had been eating together at the same table continued to share the physical fact of the table, but the quality of what passed across it had changed in the specific way shared spaces change when the people inside them have stopped being genuinely available to each other, fully present to their own position, increasingly distant from any real contact with what the other side actually contained as living human beings, rather than as an opposing formation. Conversations that attempted to bridge the factions ended badly and were stored alongside every subsequent conversation, adding to an accumulating record each side used to confirm what it had already concluded about the other. The original question receded beneath everything laid over it. What remained visible was the dispute itself, now largely self-sustaining, no longer requiring the original question to generate its energy. The specific quality of certainty inside this kind of prolonged communal division is worth naming carefully, because it is what makes such situations so resistant to any approach from outside. Each faction held its position with complete sincerity. The people on each side had reasoned their way to where they stood through what appeared, from inside their particular vantage point, like sufficient care and adequate attention to the relevant considerations. From that position, the other faction's continued resistance appeared as evidence of obstinacy, of pride, of the specific failure of attention that produces only entrenched error. What neither side could access clearly from inside its own certainty was the view from outside the dispute entirely, the view that saw a single community in the process of consuming itself rather than two positions in a fair contest, the view that saw the sustained direction of collective attention moving steadily away from what had made them a community and toward the maintenance of opposed formations. The Buddha came to them. He addressed both factions without taking sides, without offering a judgment that would resolve the original question through the authority of his position. He asked them, with genuine care and without performance, to reconcile. Both factions heard him. Both continued as before. He asked again. Nothing moved. And then, without announcement, without drama, without summoning anyone to explain the significance of what he was doing, the Buddha left. He walked out of Kosambi alone and went into the forest. Let this moment hold before anything follows. A community gathered around the pursuit of genuine understanding had the teacher present in the room and chose the argument over him, drawn there by the deeply human capacity to become so thoroughly absorbed in the texture of a prolonged grievance that even what arrived specifically to help loses its legibility from inside the absorption. The teaching that had gathered them together in the first place had become secondary to the positions. The one person most able to reach what lay beneath the dispute had become, through the logic of entrenched division, just another presence the dispute needed to organize itself around. The Buddha recognized this and did what the situation required. He removed the one thing his continued presence was making easier to avoid. He gave them the undiluted experience of what they had been choosing to remain inside. The lay community of Kosambi, the people who brought food to the monks each day, whose generosity made the practical texture of monastic life possible, saw what had happened and withdrew their support from both factions. No meals arrived for either faction. The monks were left with their positions, and without the most basic form of daily nourishment. The consequence arrived with the plainness of a physical fact. The community had stopped being the kind of thing toward which care could meaningfully flow, because it had stopped directing care outward in any direction that could have sustained the flow returning. What should have nourished had become unavailable through the sustained direction of the community's attention toward its own correctness, toward positions requiring defense, toward the maintenance of a formation that had displaced everything the community had originally gathered to be. The monks made the journey to find the Buddha in the forest. They had not resolved the original dispute. The position each faction held was, from its own vantage point, as coherent at the end as it had been at the beginning. What had changed was the accumulated weight of what sustaining that correctness had cost against what it was returning. They arrived without elaborate ceremony, carrying the specific quality of people who have arrived through practical consequence rather than interior resolution, at the edge of something they can no longer maintain. They arrived not knowing what to expect. They asked his forgiveness. What they received was not a reprimand. The Buddha taught them 6 qualities that sustain harmony when people live and work in genuine proximity over time. Bodily kindness, the care expressed in how people physically move through shared space, the consideration extended to each other in the unremarkable texture of daily proximity. Verbal kindness, what is spoken with genuine goodwill, and equally, what is withheld when withholding serves the relationship better than speaking would. Mental kindness, the sustained practice of actively wishing each other well in the interior of the mind, not as an occasional deliberate gesture, but as an ongoing orientation of goodwill toward the people sharing the same daily life, sharing what is received equitably, rather than allowing division to create separate channels that reinforce the existing separation. Holding shared commitments together, rather than using shared principles as instruments in an ongoing contest. And returning, consistently and without ceremony, to the orientation that had gathered them into community in the first place, particularly in the moments when the ordinary pressures of daily proximity had drawn collective attention towards smaller and more consuming things. Each of these 6 qualities has one common direction, outward. Each requires extending something genuine, attention, care, goodwill, consistency, the active interior wish for the other's ease, toward the people sharing the same space, rather than directing that energy toward the maintenance of a position or the protection of a self. the conflict had made feel urgently fragile. The same community, the same history, the same people who had driven away the teacher they had gathered to learn from. The only difference was the direction care was now being asked to move. And that difference, when it genuinely took hold, changed everything the shared space between them contained. There is a division in almost every life that has been running long enough to have stopped being about what it started as. A rift with a colleague, a silence with a family member, a friendship held at a maintained distance that has become normalized enough to no longer feel like a choice still being made. The original source is still present somewhere beneath the accumulated weight of everything that has passed through the gap since, every moment of feeling dismissed, every conversation that reinforced the distance rather than closing it, every small withdrawal of care deposited into the growing account of the division. Such a rift rarely heals by resolving what started it. It begins to heal with the direction attention is moving, with one small, deliberate extension of genuine care toward the person on the other side, extended without requiring them to soften first, without using their response as the condition that makes the extension worthwhile. Care that requires the other person to move first remains organized around self-protection rather than genuine outward flow. The monks had to begin without any guarantee that beginning would be received. They began anyway. The forest gave them back to themselves. Is there someone toward whom your care has quietly stopped moving? No instruction is attached to that question. Just the noticing, the name or face that arrived with it, the specific texture of a connection held at enough distance that the holding has long since stopped feeling like a decision and started feeling like the natural state of things. The same person, the same history, a different direction, available in the very next moment, without requiring anything else to change before it can begin. What remains when resistance is genuinely set down, not managed, not redirected, but actually released, is where this journey goes next. It is the quietest territory the video holds, and it arrives not through anything added, but through something finally put down. What gets set down in this story is something specific and quietly familiar. Not a dispute, not a prolonged communal grievance accumulated through weeks of entrenched position-taking. What gets set down here is the reaching, the continuous, exhausting, entirely understandable act of extending towards something that was present before and is no longer available in the same form. Finding the gap where it used to be, suffering the gap, and then reaching again before the suffering from the last finding has fully settled. This is among the most intimate forms of difficulty this video has moved through, because it requires nothing unusual to recognize. It only requires having once relied on something that present conditions have made unreachable, a capacity, a quality of energy, a way of being inside experience that belonged to a version of life that circumstances have since altered without asking for consent. A monk named Asaji was ill. not at the sharp edge of a crisis that announces itself with unmistakable urgency. He was ill in the sustained, wearing way that serious sickness occupies a body across time, present in the background of every hour, remaking the quality of daily experience, without removing the person's clear awareness of exactly how it has been remade. Other monks visited. They sat with him and asked how he was finding things. His answer, when it arrived, was precise. The deep states of meditative absorption he had relied on through long years of consistent practice, the interior conditions that had functioned as a kind of reliable ground beneath the variable surface of experience, were no longer accessible. His body in illness could not support the concentration those states required. The capacity was present in memory, close and recognizable, and entirely out of reach. He reached for it anyway, found the gap, suffered the gap with the specific quality of suffering that comes not from the absence itself, but from the continuous collision of the reaching with the absence. Then reached again, the way a tongue finds a missing tooth before the mind has consciously decided to look for it. This particular texture of suffering is worth staying inside carefully before the story continues. The reaching is not irrational. It is the entirely reasonable response of someone who knows from direct and repeated experience that what they are reaching toward is genuine, because it has been available before, because they have inhabited it and organized significant portions of their interior life around its continued presence. What illness does, in this sense, extends beyond the physical changes it produces in the body. It removes the illusion of permanence from capacities whose reliable availability had gradually come to feel like a fixed feature of identity rather than a condition dependent on circumstances that could change without warning. What Assaji had lost was not only a meditative state. He had lost the certainty of the ground he had built his experience around, and what his mind produced in response was reaching, the instinctive forward movement toward what should still be there, arriving at the gap, registering the gap, and producing suffering not only from what the illness had taken, but from the continuous insistence on finding it still present where it was no longer present. The Buddha came to where Assaji was lying. He sat with him without any quality of hurry in his arrival or in the silence he allowed before speaking. Then he asked a question whose plainness contained the full weight of everything that followed. Are you content with the body? Assaji said he was not. The teaching unfolded from that single, honest admission, without ceremony. The Buddha moved through the changing conditions of experience carefully, the physical sensations, the perceptions, the mental formations, arising and passing, the awareness itself as it moves through its various qualities, asking each time whether Assaji sought his contentment and steadiness there. Each time, the answer came back the same, and from those answers the teaching emerged with quiet precision. A person who seeks their steadiness in what changes will suffer every change as though it were a failure, the failure of impermanent conditions to behave as permanent ones. The body changing is not the problem. The insistence that it remain as it was, or return to what it was, generates a second layer of suffering laid directly over the first and indistinguishable from it through familiarity. Do not seek what is stable in what cannot be stable, the Buddha said. Rest instead in the awareness that is receiving all of this, the pain, the gap, the reaching, the finding nothing where something used to be, without itself being diminished by any of what it holds. That awareness has been present throughout the entire illness. It has received everything the illness has produced. It has not been damaged by what it received. That is where steadiness lives, right now, without requiring the body's condition to first be otherwise. Asaji received this. The receiving was not a performance of understanding assembled to honor what had just been said. It was a genuine reorientation of what his attention was doing, a quiet shift, almost imperceptible from outside, away from the continuous forward motion of the reaching and toward the awareness that had been present throughout the reaching without being altered by it. The reaching had become so continuous over the duration of the illness that its maintenance had long since stopped registering as an active choice. It had integrated itself entirely into the background texture of being inside the illness, costing something real in every moment of its continuation, without ever presenting itself as something being chosen. It simply was the experience, indistinguishable from the illness itself, until the Buddha's question made the distinction between the illness and the resistance to the illness visible for the first time. Once visible, the reaching could be set down, not through force, applied at the point of maximum strain, through seeing, clearly and honestly, what had been happening long enough for the setting down to become available as a genuine option rather than a conceptual possibility. The image for this release is not dramatic. A fist clenched so long and so continuously that the clenching has stopped feeling like a choice and become, instead, the assumed natural resting state of the hand. The person inside the clenching is not aware of choosing to clench. They are aware only of the continuous low pressure of what the grip is maintaining, integrated so thoroughly into the background of daily experience that it presents itself as the normal weight of being alive, rather than as something additional and removable. And then something draws their attention honestly to the hand. Not instruction to release, simply clear, unhurried attention directed at what is actually happening in that hand, without looking away before the seeing is complete. And in that noticing, without effort, without force, the hand begins gradually to open. The illness remained. The gap remained. The body was still the body illness had made of it. What released was the second layer, the sustained collision of the reaching with the gap, the friction of insisting continuously that what was already present should be otherwise. Removing that layer did not remove the difficulty. It removed what the difficulty had been carrying, that the difficulty itself had not placed there. there is something in almost every life that operates through this same mechanism. Perhaps it is a health situation integrated so completely into daily life that the resistance to it has become indistinguishable from the experience of it, felt not as something additional, but as the condition itself. Perhaps it is a circumstance held in permanent interior protest, real, present, and returned to, repeatedly, in the register of this should not be the case, producing suffering from both the situation and the sustained protest simultaneously, each reinforcing the weight of the other. Perhaps it is something smaller and more habitual, the low-level, ongoing friction between how an ordinary day is moving and the quiet background insistence that it move otherwise, the continuous, mild dispute between experience as it arrives and the commentary maintaining that it should arrive differently. These operate at different scales and through the same mechanism. A gap between what is present and what is being insisted should be present instead, maintained at a real cost that rarely surfaces for direct examination because it has been running below the threshold of deliberate attention long enough to feel like the ordinary weight of being alive, rather than as something additional and removable. Non-resistance, as the Buddha was pointing toward it with Assaji, is not the decision that the difficulty is acceptable or should be accepted as permanent. It is not the suppression of genuine response to circumstances that warrant a response. It is something more precise, the recognition that the difficulty is already here, fully and completely here, arriving with no reference to whether it is being resisted, and that the resistance is generating a second layer on top of the first without addressing what the first actually contains. Releasing the second layer does not remove the first. It releases what the first has been carrying, that the first did not itself produce. What remains is the difficulty, seen clearly, from a position that is no longer spending its available resources on the maintenance of the fight. What becomes possible from that position is genuinely different in kind from what was possible while the fighting was still consuming what was available for everything else. What are you still fighting right now, even though the fight itself has become the more consuming problem? Hold that question without pressing it toward a resolution that makes it easy to set aside. The fist does not need to be forced open. It needs only to be honestly seen. Noticing is where the softening begins, not as an achievement arrived at through disciplined effort, but as what naturally follows when genuine attention arrives at exactly what is happening and remains there, without looking away, long enough for what is being maintained to become visible as a choice. Assaji's release came from a question delivered without urgency by someone sitting beside him in an ordinary room. The question carried no force. It carried only accuracy and timing and the quality of unhurried attention that allowed it to land where it needed to land. That was enough. A creature with nothing arrives next, and nothing turns out to be exactly enough. In the ancient forests of India, A baby quail lay in its nest. Its wings had not yet grown into anything capable of lifting it. Its legs had not yet developed into anything that could carry its weight against the ground. Its parents were away, somewhere in the wider forest. At the exact moment, the situation most required them to be otherwise. The quail was alone with the complete facts of its situation. No wings, no feet, no parents, no capacity for any response except being present in the nest where it already was. It lay in this situation and inhabited it completely because there was no other position available to inhabit, and the total absence of other options produced a quality of presence that better equipped circumstances rarely make so entirely inevitable. In the ancient forests of India, a baby quail lay in its nest. Its wings had not yet grown into anything capable of lifting it. Its legs had not yet developed into anything that could carry its weight against the ground. Its parents were away, somewhere in the wider forest. At the exact moment, the situation most required them to be otherwise. The quail was alone with the complete facts of its situation. No wings, no feet, no parents, no capacity for any response except being present in the nest where it already was. It lay in this situation and inhabited it completely because there was no other position available to inhabit, and the total absence of other options produced a quality of presence that other circumstances rarely make so completely inevitable. The fire came without announcement. Dry forests do not negotiate with fire, and fire does not slow for the small things in its path. The other creatures moved without hesitation, birds lifting from branches and clearing the line of smoke before the heat arrived beneath them, ground animals finding the direction away from what was coming and going there, with everything available to them. The forest emptied in the urgent, particular way. It empties when what is coming leaves no survivable position in its path. In the nest, the baby quail lay still. It had no direction to move in. The stillness was not courage, not resignation, not the product of any practice or accumulated wisdom. It was simply the only position the facts allowed, inhabited fully because there was nowhere else to inhabit. The fire reached the part of the forest where the nest was. The heat arrived before the flame, the way it always arrives, as a warning that has already come too late to be useful as a warning. The quail looked at what was coming and did the only thing available to it. It spoke. Not a cry for rescue, not a prayer organized around hope, not a bargain offered to any force that might be listening. The quail had none of these available, and it knew this with complete clarity. What it had was only what was completely and verifiably the case, and it named this with the plainness of something that has nothing to protect and nothing to add. I have no wings to carry me from here. I have no feet to run. My parents are not here. I have lived in this nest and done nothing in this life except exist in it. By the power of this truth, let the fire stop. The fire stopped. It reached the edge of something it could not cross and held there. A circle of ground around the nest remained unburned. The forest around it burned completely. The circle held. The texts say this circle remained visible in the forest for many years after the fire had passed. A place where the ground had not burned when everything surrounding it had, left behind by a creature with nothing to offer except the complete and sincere account of its own small existence. What the circle marked was not achievement. It was not the outcome of a being who had prepared well or arrived with impressive spiritual resources. It was the trace of total sincerity, of a creature that looked at the fire and named, without addition or subtraction, exactly what was actually the case about itself in that moment. The act had no strategy in it. There was no calculation about approach or leverage, no wisdom assembled from experience about how best to meet this particular kind of difficulty. There were no available options, and the complete absence of options is exactly what made the sincerity so entire, because sincerity of this quality does not arise from virtue alone. It arises when there is nothing left to put between oneself and the plain truth of one's own situation. The quail was not performing. It was not reaching for an outcome. It was doing the only thing available, naming what was actually the case, without addition, without subtraction, without the slightest gap between the truth and the speaking of it. The act was the situation itself, made audible. And what is made audible with that quality of completeness carries a power that nothing assembled for the purpose of producing power can generate. The tradition this story comes from holds a specific teaching that a sincere declaration of what is genuinely true, one's actual nature, one's genuine situation, one's honest account of what is real right now, without addition or omission, has a power that deliberate effort cannot produce through any other means. Because something completely sincere, completely without agenda, completely identical with the situation it names, participates in what is real, in a way that what is assembled for effect does not. The tradition calls this an act of truth. It appears across many canonical stories, always as a last resort, always in a moment of complete helplessness, always with the same structure. I am what I am. I have what I have. By the power of this truth, let the outcome be what this truth makes possible. Think about what this does not require of you. It does not require accomplishment. It does not require years of accumulated practice or sufficient readiness before the act becomes available. It requires only that you be what you actually are, in the situation you actually inhabit, naming this honestly and completely, without the additions the mind places around honest self-accounting. Your situation as it genuinely stands, your capacity as it genuinely is, the truth of where you are right now, offered without modification. The quail offered its incapacity with total sincerity. That was the whole of what it had. The circle stood for years in the forest. Something that helpless, that unaccomplished, that entirely without resources, except the willingness to name what was true, left a mark that outlasted the fire and many seasons after. There may be something you have been waiting to offer until you are more prepared, some way of showing up some act of honesty or presence or care, postponed until you feel more certain of what you carry. The quail could not wait for the wings. The fire was already arriving. What it had in that moment was what the moment required, and what made it sufficient was the completeness of the offering, not the quality of what was offered. The circle was not made by readiness. It was made by presence so complete that the fire found nothing to enter through. You are already here. This has never been nothing. The version of you in this moment, with whatever remains unresolved, whatever feels unfinished, whatever has not yet become what you imagined it should, whatever about you still seems inadequate to the life you are trying to inhabit, is the real version. The only version that exists. It is already present, already real, already enough to name what is true and let that naming do what it does. The circle has always been available to you. It is not reserved for the accomplished, or the healed, or the sufficiently prepared. It is built from the same simple material the quail had, the honest, complete, unguarded presence of whatever you actually are in this specific, unrepeatable moment, without waiting for better circumstances to make the offering feel more adequate. Stay in that. Let it settle into wherever it needs to settle. The fire has already found its edge. The gap between something happening and how the mind meets it is still there. It will always be there. What has changed, perhaps, is what you know about what lives inside it. The mind standing in that gap is not fixed. It has been shaped by every story it has ever moved through, every moment of genuine seeing, every time awareness arrived, a breath before the reaction did, and something dissolved that would otherwise have remained. That shaping has been happening quietly throughout this listening, whether or not any of it felt like anything while it was underway. Somewhere right now, others are sitting with these same words, in different rooms, different cities, different hours of their day or night, carrying their own version of what you carry. You are not alone in this. The image to carry into the evening is not a teaching. It is simply a circle of unburned ground in the middle of a forest that burned completely around it. Something survived that had no resources except sincerity. The fire found its edge and held there. The circle remained for years, patient, unmarked, real. The gate opens from the inside. It always has. And the mind that opens it is already here.